This is one of those issues where it's quite reassuring to hear it being debated in the House of Commons, because it's only in recent weeks that I've been visiting constituents of mine who are neighbours of some of these rogue providers. And it is also an issue that dominates because it is about vulnerable people, often with significant challenges. And they are the people that are losing out in all of this, because this should be a vital function, helping the most marginalised and vulnerable groups in society. And instead, it seems to be filling up for the chronic shortages of affordable social housing all too often. Because social housing is now at its lowest rate in decades, an annual net loss of 24,000 social homes. And one of the outcomes of this is that we're now over-reliant on exempt accommodation, often at extortionate costs. Supported housing commands far higher rents, and it's one of the reasons we don't see the housing benefit cap. Landlords can demand higher rents than social or privately rented housing, and of course there could be a legitimate reason for this. There are good providers delivering quality services, but let's be under no illusions. Unscrupulous agencies are exploiting the enormous gaps in the regulatory regime to rake in higher rents while providing minimal support. And as is too often the case, substandard housing. In theory, transitional forms of supported housing should be a bridge to independent living, a way for vulnerable people to have a safe place to call home, a place where you receive the support you need to regain your independence. And there are shining examples. Damien John Kelly House in Picton in Liverpool is just such a place, a home for men in recovery from addiction. It is a fantastic community that supports, inspires and allows for transformational change. And I think to try and put the difference between what the substandard housing is to what a good provider is, a good provider provides a community, it provides support work, it provides support for mental health. A bad provider, you might get a key for a cupboard in a shared kitchen, you might get an extra lock on your door. It is such a significant difference, and it either makes or ruins people's lives. People in my constituency write to me for help. They live in what they thought was supported housing, only to realise that the support package they were promised did not exist. And it might be as little as a CCTV camera in the hallway. The reality of the supported housing racket is vulnerable residents with complex needs, living in squalor, being isolated, without access to local services, sharing a house with residents who all require specialist support. And what is bad for the people living in these properties can quickly escalate to blight the lives of their neighbours and the local community. It's an experience all too familiar for my constituents in Anfield and Walton and further afield. And while vulnerable residents suffer and the community around them suffers, rogue landlords and agencies collect rents from the taxpayer far in excess of other rates, and without proper regulation. They game the system easily and without consequence. This is a lucrative enterprise for some, operated and funded by the state, and it's almost completely unaccountable. And Liverpool has seen a recent influx of these properties due to the many larger properties we have. They are ripe for conversion to HMOs or exempt accommodation, and they're targeted by investment companies from far and wide who buy up these cheaper properties in the most deprived areas and lease these to umbrella management companies who moonlight as supported housing providers. The result is that rents are set artificially high to maximise the yield for their investors. The net cost to Liverpool after receipt of government subsidy has risen year on year to £4 million in 2020. And as profits for landlords increase, so do the reports of poorly managed, unsafe accommodation that provides that threadbare support. There are so many loopholes to allow for this profiteering. Registered providers are not even subject to the most basic licensing requirements that HMOs must legally apply with. And that must be unjustifiable. In 2020, the government introduced the National Statement of Expectations for Supported Housing. So it has tried to deal with this problem fairly recently, but it set out standards for the accommodation element of supported housing. It is a reference tool, it's a polite suggestion at best, and so it must be developed, toughened up and put on a statutory footing, and these standards must be legally enforceable. The National Statement of Expectations doesn't even include minimum quality standards for the support, care and supervision that these companies are being paid the inflated rents to deliver. It is so poorly defined that an extra lock on a door would pass the test every time. Local authorities could be given the powers to regulate this sector, but this must go hand in hand with proper funding and support. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I see providing a decent home for every person as the most important challenge facing this country. The public pays in the region of £20 billion each year in housing support, money that more often than not lines the pockets of property investors, companies and landlords. The reason we are not building decent homes for all has nothing to do with constraints on public spending. It's a free-for-all when public spending lines the pockets of profiteers. We see it time and again. It's this government's choice not to invest public money in public provision, and it is unjustifiable. It would cost the government half of what it pays in housing support each year to return us to the spending levels of house building of the post-war governments of the 1940s and 50s that strive to make this country a country that worked for all of its citizens, and from which today we have diverted so far away. Thank you.